right, everyone, we are going to move on, we really kind of covered the data in motion as well as a little bit of the data in use. Now we're going to jump into data at rest and data in use. So we're going to be able to kind of cover that, which is, like I said, that's kind of one of those unique fields there that Microsoft offers. But we're going to be talking about information protection. Now, this is actually quite a complicated scenario here, and this is probably very new for a lot of you. So I'm going to do my best here to explain it and why we care about it, because this is the new, we'll say a new big deal, we'll put it. So let's jump right in before we continue going on here. So because I just am so happy to talk about these things here. This is a very fantastic suite of tools here, as we will kind of discover. So first and foremost, information protection, or MIP. You may also have heard of something called AIP, or Azure Information Protection. There's a lot of different things on that. However, Azure Information Protection as a name exists only in one circumstance, and that is for the Azure Information Protection Scanner, the AIP scanner, which is an on-premise scanner tool. AIP is no longer a standard. It has all been moved and rebranded to Microsoft Information Protection. So, what is it? It's a method of protecting sensitive corporate data at rest and in use. Now, that's a kind of a cop-out, to be completely honest with you here. But in order to understand what MIP is, we have to understand some other things. We got to dive a little bit further here into, we've already touched on some of these topics, like data classifications and such. But A, let's reiterate, and B, let's dive a little bit further into it. So, data classifications, what are they inside of an organization? Well, this is a taxonomy or a folksonomy. So a folksonomy here, as we've said, the difference between a taxonomy and a folksonomy is a taxonomy is known to the group, known to a very large group, and no matter which kind of one you go to. So for instance, inside of the US, if we go from Social Security numbers all look the same, and whichever organization or vertical or whatever you may go to from one to the other, they all treated the same. Whereas a folksonomy is more along the lines of, we're going to talk about some examples here in a second, but they're more along the lines of, for instance, we'll just say a employee ID number. That's an easy one. So an employee ID number, we all know what an employee ID number is, but for every organization, they have their own little way of doing it. They have their own way of classifying it, if you will. So that's a folksonomy. It's unique to the folk of people. So with all that, it's within an organization that allows us to organize data in a manner of importance or sensitivity. These are two big words here when we're looking at sensitivity or importance. So let's look at some examples of data classifications that we would deal with here. Public, confidential, highly confidential, top secret. Now, we've seen these already once before, but public, confidential, highly confidential, and top secret are very unique to an organization. We all know that something that is, let's just say, top secret is different for every organization. You can walk into a hospital, something that they may classify as top secret is far different than something that we maybe within the government. I mean, for instance, if you go into like a Department of Defense contractor, if they label something top secret, that's some severe top secret stuff. So we know that they treat it all differently. Organization's different and unique in this aspect here, which is why it's very difficult to be able to say what is confidential, what is highly confidential, what's top secret. Well, looking through all of these here, it really based off of this is data that if it were to leave the organization or if it were to do something the organization, then it could potentially cause harm. Obviously, the higher you go up the gradient there, we start off with public. Well, obviously that one is designed to leave the organization. Confidential, maybe in certain circumstances. Highly confidential, probably not. And we're probably going to restrict it to leave a little more inside of the organization. And then top secret is going to be the highest. It should under no circumstance ever leave the organization. And it is going to be restricted even inside of the organization very highly as well. Again, this is just an example because there's a ton of ways to do this here. But just understand that this folksonomy here is important. It is an important driver of this. All right, we've defined what public, confidential, highly confidential, and top secret is. Now, who are going to be actually classifying the data? Who are going to be actually working? When I generate a new piece of knowledge, what's going to happen there? This is where data custodians come into play. Okay, now this term here are basically individuals inside of an organization whose job it is, okay, to classify data. So for an example, corporate compliance. There may be an actual dedicated group of people that go through all the knowledge generated inside of the organization, and it gets classified. They go in and say, okay, well, based off everything we see in here, this is a public, this is a confidential, this is a highly confidential. There are other ways that we can do this as well, and we'll start seeing this here through automated processes. We've already seen here some of the pattern-based. Well, again, if these people's job is to classify, we can kind of give them some help where, okay, well, it has credit card numbers in it, it has social security numbers in it, and whatever. Okay, well, we're going to automatically label this as a highly confidential, let's just say. Now, why do we care? Well, the whole thing about this here is sensitivity labels, or excuse me, labeling as a whole here, or classification, is driven by sensitivity labeling. So inside of Office 365, there are two types of labeling and two ways to label as well. So there's manual labeling. This is the data custodian model. And then, as I just kind of alluded to, was automatic labeling. Hey, we're going to give those people whose job it is. Now, the data custodians may not be a dedicated group of people for an organization, depending on the size of it. Every user may be their own data custodians. Where I generate a piece of knowledge, I have to label it as such. So again, there's a lot of different variables there that we really have to think about. But there's the manual labeling, which again, I'm generating this new document. I have to actually click on the label and assign it as such. Whereas automatic labeling is looking for trainable classifiers, it's looking for, all of these sensitive information types, whatever it is, schema sets, whatever it is. Looking at all of those things and says, okay, well, it meets these criteria, we're going to put a label on it. Okay? Again, to the question here, why do we care? Sensitivity labels are persistent and they stay with the data no matter where it goes. If I were to put a top secret label on a document, okay, and let's just say I was going along with the lines of, hey, this is a very secure document and only specific people inside of the organization can view it. If that label or if that piece of information were to be emailed out, taken and put on a USB drive or whatever, put in a personal Dropbox or anything like that, when I open that label or open up that document, that label is going to try and home back into the Information Rights Management Service inside of Office 365, and it's going to say, hey, you got to sign in. If you can sign in, great. If you can't, you don't have access to it. That's what we can do here, and that's the true power of sensitivity labeling. We can do much more as well, inside as well as outside of the organization. Okay, so no matter what, we could even say, let's just say we have Sally and we have Jim. Sally labels a document. She has full access to that. Let's just say it's top secret. And inside of the organization, even if it's in a public SharePoint site, even if that particular document is in a public SharePoint site, Sally labels it as top secret. Jim does not have access to that label, and he's not able to open up that document. He's going to click on it, and he's going to say, you don't have permissions to do so. You can't access this document. So we're able to protect it inside as well as outside of the organization. These are very, very powerful. So what can we do with labels? Well, the first thing that we can do is, well, obviously, classify the data. So we'll know here is that we have data that, here's our public data, here's our confidential, top secret, highly confidential, so on and so forth. So it's a way of classifying data and labeling it. Easy enough. Secondly, we can protect the data. Let's look at some of the protections. Now we're going to create labels and everything inside of our lab here, of course, but for now we just have to kind of bear with it to understand what are some of the protections that we can do. Well, we can encrypt. We have document level, email level, whatever it may be. We're going to get to what we can protect here in just a minute, but we can do encryption on these. Now these are very highly secure encryptions. AES 256-bit level encryption. So those are industry standard in terms of information rights management encryptions. With information rights management, or IRM, what the heck does that mean? Well, IRM allows us to apply group permissions, meaning that this group inside of the organization can read, write. We can do print. We can restrict actions on the document. We can say that everybody in the organization can view the document, but only this group of people inside of the organization can edit the document. So we can do it that way, is that when somebody opens it up inside of the organization, now I have kind of a hierarchy, is that if I open it up, I'm just a regular user, I open it up, I can view it, can't do anything else with it. If I'm a member of that group, I can open it up, I can edit it. If that document were to leave the organization and I was not a member of inside of the organization or outside of the organization, well, guess what? I'm also going to fail. So that's the whole point here. Group permissions. We also have the ability here to content expiration. We can expire this content as well. So we could take the content that, let's just say that after a period of time, this is kind of like a James Bond scenario here, is that this will detonate after a period of time. And maybe we only want this to be active for 90 days or something. And then after 90 days, poof, nobody has access to it anymore. And it's effectively destroyed. We can play around with that, of course, too. Same thing with offline access. If I were to take a document offline, would I have access to it? Well, the answer is no. But I can choose is that I can't even if I do have access to the document and I'm offline, I will not have access to it. It essentially stops it there. So these are some of the pieces of information rights management that we can play around with. We can also mark the data. Now, this is a little bit different than classifying the data. What I'm referring to here are going to be headers, footers, and watermarks. So we can have a big old fat watermark on there that says, hey, this is top secret. And the reason why we care about that, well, is because of the protections on it. We want the users to go in and say, oh, well, I know that this is a top secret document, okay, because it says top secret on it. And looking at all of the things that we can see on here, the users are going to be very well aware. We can have a header, we can have a footer. I generally err on the side of headers and footers just because they're a little less intrusive. Watermarks are just really big and kind of in the way. So I like headers and footers, like a little footer down on the bottom that says, hey, organization name dash public or dash confidential, whatever, just so the users know. It's really easy to be able to do that. And again, we'll demonstrate this here. So now we've determined what we can do with the labels. We can protect these here in quite a lot of manners. Well, now we want to know what type or what can we protect. We can protect all types of information. Again, knowledge generation here. Documents, emails, groups, containers, and sites. We'll get onto this here in just a second because this is an important part here. Emails and documents are really referred to as items, which Microsoft just kind of bundles into one, which again kind of fits that same category. I can understand emails and documents. We can also protect Power BI or the schematized assets, SQL, Azure storage, data lakes, blobs. There's a whole bunch of different stuff inside of Azure storages that we can protect as well. We can protect through SQL specific specific rows inside of a SQL database. We can put a sensitivity label on those rows as well. A lot of different things. We can get very creative with those, of course. But again, these are what we can protect. So this is quite a lot of different things, but again, all types of information, such as documents and emails, and they don't have to be documents. It could be Excel, PowerPoint, Word, PDFs also absolutely can be done. We can do a lot of different things here. So we can really protect most of the knowledge generation as well as emails. Those are the biggest areas. Groups are also a big part of it here. I generally don't see Power BI used too much. I have seen the schematized assets used, but not as frequently as you would expect. Okay, so this is what we can protect. Now let's talk about how we can protect it and what's the user's experience. Well, we have manual and we have auto labeling. So I have a versus on here, and my recommendation here, I cannot recommend that enough, is both need to be utilized. And the reason why I say both is because a lot of my customers think, all right, well, we're going to have technology take care of this for us. Well, that's not a good idea because this is fundamentally changing the way that users operate. Really, it is. Because again, if I am opening up a document and I have to label it, I'm going to have things pop up and say, hey, this is protected or this needs to be protected or, whatever it may be. And I need to understand it, and I need to be involved in this process because, again, I am fundamentally changing the way that I work in a day-to-day scenario. Very difficult to roll these out here. I will be completely honest with you. This is probably one of my more challenging type projects. But manual labeling versus auto labeling, both need to be utilized to be successful. Users need to be able to select the label and classify it appropriately. If the user, when they generate the knowledge, and it says that, hey, the user is popping on a label and I know that this is a confidential thing, I need to be trained what is confidential, what is highly confidential, top secret, public. Just using those 4. There could be hundreds of others. Who knows? Generally, we don't want that many. We want no more than 5, realistically speaking. But when the users generate their own knowledge and they label it themselves, that actually protects us. But here's the big factor here, is that what if they are labeling it, everything is just public? They just want to next finish, get along with it as fast as they can. That's where we need to involve them on this. They need to be trained. They need to be appropriately, as I said, they need to be appropriately trained and understand how to use the system. Now, users can just come in, classify the labels, and I'll show you how to do that. It's very simple, and it's designed to be very simple. It's right inside of the Office apps, okay? We can also have Microsoft 365 automatically apply labels based on certain conditions. So we can automatically, while the data is at rest or in use, so we have 2 types of auto labeling, which we'll get to. But if a user is, they create a document that has credit card numbers in it and a whole bunch of different things on it, well, we can go behind it using the SharePoint indexer or Exchange. Now, keep in mind, Exchange data is never indexed at rest. Exchange data is only, and these automatic applying of labels and such, only happens when they're in motion. Only. So Exchange is a bit unique there. But that's by design. Exchange has always been like that. We can use sensitive information types or train up classifiers. So again, in this instance here, we're covering ourselves on not just the pattern-based, if it has credit card numbers, social security numbers, and such, but we can also use the trainable classifiers of, hey, this is an HR document, and we automatically classify all HR documents as confidential, whatever. So the idea here is that it's not really a versus. It should be manual and auto labeling, really, because you need to use both. The users need to be completely involved in on this. They need to be trained. They need to know how to be custodians of their data. Now, again, if you are a larger organization where you have kind of an army of compliance people that's their job is to ensure compliance on knowledge generation, go for it. You don't really have to train the users too much. They'll just generate knowledge. Those people will go behind them and classify their data and protect it accordingly. Both work, but again, I don't see why it is so difficult to include the users in on this. Yeah, this is a complicated scenario here, but I think we all know how to classify data, and if we just have a very easy system that basically, here's 3 options for you to choose, whatever you generate, put it in one of these 3 options. If it doesn't, then let us know. And that's really it. So we talked about labeling of the items, the documents, the emails, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and such. But what about item and container labeling? So again, they're very different from each other. Very, 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 very different from each other. And I really have to stress this. Item labeling is applying a sensitivity label to an individual item for protection of that data and persistence. So that's it. Container-based labeling protects the group or the site's perimeter. Now, I say perimeter here because it has nothing to do with the data inside of it. So what it's doing here is that we are controlling access to the site or group. Now, this would be a SharePoint site, or the Microsoft 365 group, vis-a-vis could be a team, as well as external sharing settings. Okay, so that is the purpose of container-based labeling here, is that container-based labeling are very powerful. Okay, but it is not a point to, we cannot say that if we put a container-based label on a SharePoint site, that every document that goes into that document library or to that site will automatically get classified as that sensitivity label. That is not how it works. It is not inheritance-based. Those are retention labels, which we'll talk about in a later discussion here. These are only for sensitivity labels, which is around protections of the document. That's it. Sensitivity labels for groups and sites do not protect individual items. They contain or protect the perimeter of the group or the site. And that is it. That is the only piece of this. Now again, we've talked about quite a lot on this one here, but this is one of those scenarios that makes sense to demonstrate. Let's jump into lab. Create a sensitivity label here. We are going to have to create this in 2 sections here because there is time in between. When we create a new label, it takes time. So we're going to essentially break that lab into 2 sections. Okay, with that being said, that is everything for sensitivity or information protection. We're going to jump into the lab here, play around with those, and I will see you over on the next one. So thank you for your time.